Chapter 15. Pilchard and Wren. Captain Pilchard and Captain Wren, the inoffensive Joint Squadron Operations officers, were both mild, soft-spoken men of less than middle height who enjoyed flying combat missions and begged nothing more in life and Colonel Cathcart than the opportunity to continue flying them. They had flown hundreds of combat missions and wanted to fly hundreds more. They assigned themselves to every one. Nothing so wonderful as war had ever happened to them before, and they were afraid it might never happen to them again. They conducted their duties humbly and reticently, with a minimum of fuss, and went to great lengths not to antagonize anyone. They smiled quickly at everyone they passed. When they spoke, they mumbled. They were shifty, cheerful, subservient men who were comfortable only with each other and never met anyone else's eye, not even Yossarian's eye at the open-air meeting they called to reprimand him publicly for making Kid Samson turn back from the mission to Bologna. "Fellas," said Captain Pilchard, who had thinning dark hair and smiled awkwardly, "when you turn back from a mission, try to make sure it's for something important, will you? Not for something unimportant, like a defective intercom, or something like that. Okay? Captain Wren has more he wants to say to you on that subject." "Captain Pilchard's right, fellas," said Captain Wren, "and that's all I'm going to say to you on that subject. Well, we finally got to Bologna today, and we found out it's a milk run. We were all a little nervous, I guess, and didn't do too much damage. Well, listen to this. Colonel Cathcart got permission for us to go back, and tomorrow we're really going to pace those ammunition dumps. Now, what do you think about that?" And to prove to Yossarian that they bore him no animosity, they even assigned him to fly lead bombardier with McWatt in the first formation when they went back to Bologna the next day. He came in on the target like a Habermeyer, confidently taking no evasive action at all, and suddenly they were shooting the living shit out of him. Heavy flak was everywhere. He had been lulled, lured, and trapped, and there was nothing he could do but sit there like an idiot and watch the ugly black puff smashing up to kill him. There was nothing he could do until his bombs dropped, but look back into the bomb site where the fine crosshairs in the lens were glued magnetically over the target exactly where he had placed them, intersecting perfectly deep inside the yard of his block of camouflaged warehouses before the base of the first building. He was trembling steadily as the plane crept ahead. He could hear the hollow boom, 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 boom of the flak pounding all around him in overlapping measures of 4, the sharp, piercing crack of a single shell exploding suddenly very close by. His head was busting with 1,000 dissonant impulses as he prayed for the bombs to drop. He wanted to sob. The engines droned on monotonously like a fat, lazy fly. At last the indices on the bomb site crossed, tripping away the 8 500-pounders one after another. The plane lurched upward buoyantly with the lightened load. Yossarian bent away from the bomb site crookedly to watch the indicator on his left. When the pointer touched 0, he closed the bomb bay doors. Over the intercom, at the top of his voice, he shrieked, "Turn right hard!" McWatt responded instantly. With a grinding howl of engines, he flipped the plane over on one wing and wrung it around remorselessly in a screaming turn away from the twin spires of flak Yossarian had spied stabbing toward them. Then Yossarian had McWatt climb and keep climbing higher and higher until they tore free finally into a calm, diamond blue sky that was sunny and pure everywhere and laced in the distance with long white veils of tenuous fluff. The wind strummed soothingly against the cylindrical panes of his windows, and he relaxed exultantly, only until they picked up speed again and then turned McWatt left and plunged him right back down, noticing with a transitory spasm of elation the mushrooming clusters of flak leaping open high above him and back over his shoulder to the right, exactly where he could have been if he had not turned left and dived. He leveled McWatt out with another harsh cry and whipped him upward and around again into a ragged blue patch of unpolluted air just as the bombs he had dropped began to strike. The first one fell in the yard exactly where he had aimed, and then the rest of the bombs from his own plane and from the other planes in his flight burst open on the ground in a charge of rapid orange flashes across the tops of the buildings, which collapsed instantly in a vast, churning wave of pink and gray and coal-black smoke that went rolling out turbulently in all directions and quaked convulsively in its bowels as though from great blasts of red and white and golden sheet lightning. Well, will you look at that? Arfi marveled sonorously beside Yossarian, his plump, orbicular face sparkling with a look of bright enchantment. There must have been an ammunition dump down there. Yossarian had forgotten about Arfi. Get out, he shouted at him. Get out of the nose! Arfi smiled politely and pointed down toward the target in a generous invitation for Yossarian to look. Yossarian began slapping at him insistently and signaled wildly toward the entrance of the crawlway. Get back in the ship, he cried frantically. Get back in the ship! Arfi shrugged amiably. I can't hear you, he explained. Yossarian seized him by the straps of his parachute harness and pushed him backward toward the crawlway, just as the plane was hit with a jarring concussion that rattled his bones and made his heart stop. He knew at once they were all dead. Climb! He screamed into the intercom at McWatt when he saw he was still alive. Climb, you bastard! Climb! 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 The plane zoomed upward again in a climb that was swift and straining until he leveled it out with another harsh shout at McWatt and wrenched it around once more in a roaring, merciless 45-degree turn that sucked his insides out in one enervating sniff and left him floating flushless in midair until he leveled McWatt out again, just long enough to hurl him back around toward the right and then down into a screeching dive. Through endless blobs of ghostly black smoke he sped, the hanging smut wafting against the smooth plexiglass nose of the ship like an evil, damp, sooty vapor against his cheeks. His heart was hammering again in aching terror as he hurtled upward and downward through the blind gangs of flak, charging murderously into the sky at him, then sagging inertly. Sweat gushed from his neck in torrents and poured over his chest and waist with a feeling of warm slime. He was vaguely aware for an instant that the planes in his formation were no longer there. And then he was aware of only himself. His throat hurt like a raw slash from the strangling intensity with which he shrieked each command to McWatt. The engines rose to a deafening, agonized, ululating bellow each time McWatt changed direction. And far out in front, the bursts of flaks were still swarming into the sky from the new batteries of guns poking around for accurate altitude as they waited sadistically for him to fly into range. The plane was slammed again suddenly with another loud, jarring explosion that almost rocked it over on its back, and the nose filled immediately with sweet clouds of blue smoke. Something was on fire. Yossarian whirled to escape and smacked into Arfi, who had struck a match and was placidly lighting his pipe. Yossarian gaped at his grinning, moon-faced navigator in utter shock and confusion. It occurred to him that one of them was mad. Jesus Christ, he screamed at Arfi in tortured amazement. Get the hell out of the nose! Are you crazy? Get out! What? Said Arfi. Get out! Yossarian yelled hysterically and began clubbing Arfi backhanded with both fists to drive him away. Get out! I still can't hear you, Arfi called back innocently with an expression of mild and reproving perplexity. You'll have to talk a little louder. Get out of the nose, Yossarian shrieked in frustration. They're trying to kill us! Don't you understand? They're trying to kill us! Which way should I go, goddammit? McWatt shouted furiously over the intercom in a suffering, high-pitched voice. Which way should I go? Turn left! Left, you goddamn dirty son of a bitch! Turn left hard! Arfi crept up close behind Yossarian and jabbed him sharply in the ribs with the stem of his pipe. Yossarian flew up toward the ceiling with a whinnying cry, then jumped completely around on his knees, white as a sheet and quivering with rage. Arfi winked encouragingly and jerked his thumb back toward McWatt with a humorous moo. Moo? What's eating him? He asked with a laugh. Yossarian was struck with a weird sense of distortion. Will you get out of here? He yelped beseechingly and shoved Arfi over with all his strength. Are you deaf or something? Get back in the plane! And to McWatt he screamed, Dive! Dive! Down they sank once more into the crunching, thudding, voluminous barrage of bursting anti-aircraft shells as Arfi came creeping back behind Yossarian and jabbed him sharply in the ribs again. Yossarian shied upward with another whinnying gasp. I still couldn't hear you, Arfi said. I said, get out of here, Yossarian shouted and broke into tears. He began punching Arfi in the body with both hands as hard as he could. Get away from me! Get away! Punching Arfi was like sinking his fists into a limp sack of inflated rubber. There was no resistance, no response at all from the soft, insensitive mass, and after a while Yossarian's spirit died and his arms dropped helplessly with exhaustion. He was overcome with a humiliating feeling of impotence and was ready to weep in self-pity. "What did you say?" Arfi said. "Get away from me," Yossarian answered, pleading with him now. "Go back in the plane." "I still can't hear you." "Never mind," wailed Yossarian. "Never mind. Just leave me alone." "Never mind what?" Yossarian began hitting himself in the forehead. He seized Arfi by the shirt front and, struggling to his feet for traction, dragged him to the rear of the nose compartment and flung him down like a bloated and unwieldy bag in the entrance of the crawlway. A shell banged open with a stupendous clout right beside his ear as he was scrambling back toward the front, and some undestroyed recess of his intelligence wondered that it did not kill them all. They were climbing again. The engines were howling again as though in pain, and the air inside the plane was acrid with the smell of machinery and fetid with the stench of gasoline. The next thing he knew, it was snowing. Thousands of tiny bits of white paper were falling like snowflakes inside the plane, milling around his head so thickly that they clung to his eyelashes when he blinked in astonishment and fluttered against his nostrils and lips each time he inhaled. When he spun around in bewilderment, Arfi was grinning proudly from ear to ear like something inhuman as he held up a shattered paper map for Yossarian to see. A large chunk of flak had ripped up from the floor through Arfi's colossal jumble of maps and had ripped out through the ceiling inches away from their heads. Arfi's joy was sublime. "Will you look at this?" he murmured, waggling two of his stubby fingers playfully into Yossarian's face through the hole in one of his maps. "Will you look at this?" Yossarian was dumbfounded by his state of rapturous contentment. Arfi was like an eerie ogre in a dream, incapable of being bruised or evaded, and Yossarian dreaded him for a complex of reasons he was too petrified to untangle. Wind whistling up through the jagged gash in the floor kept the myriad bits of paper circulating like alabaster particles in a paperweight, and contributed to a sensation of lacquered, waterlogged unreality. Everything seemed strange, so tawdry and grotesque. His head was throbbing from a shrill clamor that drilled relentlessly into both ears. It was McWatt begging for directions in an incoherent frenzy. Yossarian continued staring in tormented fascination at Arfi's spherical countenance beaming at him so serenely and vacantly through the drifting whirls of white paper bits, and concluded that he was a raving lunatic just as 8 bursts of flak broke open successfully at eye level off to the right, then 8 more, and then 8 more. The last group pulled over toward the left so that they were almost directly in front. "Turn left hard!" he hollered to McWatt as Arfi kept grinning, and McWatt did turn left hard, but the flak turned left hard with them, catching up fast, and Yossarian hollered, "I said hard! Hard, 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 you bastard, hard!" And McWatt bent the plane around even harder still, and suddenly, miraculously, they were out of range. The flak ended. The guns stopped booming at them, and they were alive. Behind him, men were dying. Strung out for miles in a stricken, tortuous, squirming line, the other flights of planes were making the same hazardous journey over the target, threading their swift way through the swollen masses of new and old bursts of flak, like rats racing in a pack through their own droppings. One was on fire and flapped lamely off by itself, billowing gigantically like a monstrous blood-red star. As Yossarian watched, the burning plane floated over on its side and began spiraling down slowly in wide, tremulous, narrowing circles, its huge flaming burden blazing orange and flaring out and back like a long, swirling cape of fire and smoke. There were parachutes, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the plane gyrated into a spin and fell the rest of the way to the ground, fluttering insensibly inside its vivid pyre like a shred of colored tissue paper. One whole flight of planes from another squadron had been blasted apart. Yossarian sighed barrenly, his day's work done. He was listless and sticky. The engines crooned mellifluously as McWatt throttled back to loiter and allowed the rest of the planes in his flight to catch up. The abrupt stillness seemed alien and artificial, a little insidious. Yossarian unsnapped his flak suit and took off his helmet. He sighed again, restlessly, and closed his eyes and tried to relax. "Where's Orr?" somebody asked suddenly over his intercom. Yossarian bounded up with a one-syllable cry that crackled with anxiety and provided the only rational explanation for the whole mysterious phenomenon of the flak at Bologna. "Orr!" He lunged forward over the bomb site to search downward through the plexiglass for some reassuring sign of Orr, who drew flak like a magnet, and who had undoubtedly attracted the crack batteries of the whole Hermann Goring division to Bologna overnight, from wherever the hell they had been stationed the day before when Orr was still in Rome. Arfi launched himself forward an instant later and cracked Yossarian on the bridge of the nose with the sharp rim of his flak helmet. Yossarian cursed him as his eyes flooded with tears. "There he is," Arfi orated funerally, pointing down dramatically at a hay wagon and 2 horses standing before the barn of a gray stone farmhouse. "Smashed to bits. I guess their numbers were all up." Yossarian swore at Arfi again and continued searching intently, cold with a compassionate kind of fear now for the little bouncy and bizarre buck-toothed tent mate who had smashed Appleby's forehead open with a ping-pong racket and who was scaring the daylights out of Yossarian once again. At last, Yossarian spotted the 2-engine, twin-ruddered plane as it flew out of the green background of the forests over a field of yellow farmland. One of the propellers was feathered and perfectly still, but the plane was maintaining altitude and holding a proper course. Yossarian muttered an unconscious prayer of thankfulness and then flared up at Orr savagely in a ranting fusion of resentment and relief. "That bastard," he began. "That goddamn stunted, red-faced, big-cheeked, curly-headed, buck-toothed rat bastard son of a bitch!" "What?" said Arfi. "That dirty goddamn midget-assed, apple-cheeked, goggle-eyed, undersized, buck-toothed, grinning, crazy son of a bastard! Son of a bitchin' bastard," Yossarian sputtered. "What? Never mind. I still can't hear you," Arfi answered. Yossarian swung himself around methodically to face Arfi. "You prick," he began. "Me? You pompous, rotund, neighborly, vacuous, complacent—" Arfi was unperturbed. Calmly, he struck a wooden match and sucked noisily at his pipe with an eloquent air of benign and magnanimous forgiveness. He smiled sociably and opened his mouth to speak. Yossarian put his hand over Arfi's mouth and pushed him away wearily. He shut his eyes and pretended to sleep all the way back to the field so that he would not have to listen to Arfi or see him again. At the briefing room, Yossarian made his intelligence report to Captain Black and then waited in muttering suspense with all the others until Orr chugged into sight overhead finally, with his one good engine still keeping him aloft gamely. Nobody breathed. Orr's landing gear would not come down. Yossarian hung around only until Orr had crash-landed safely, and then stole the first jeep he could find with a key in the ignition, and raced back to his tent to begin packing feverishly for the emergency rest leave he had decided to take in Rome, where he found Luciana and her invisible scar that same night. Chapter 16. Luciana. He found Luciana sitting alone at a table in the Allied officers' nightclub, where the drunken Anzac major who had brought her there had been stupid enough to desert her for the ribald company of some singing comrades at the bar. "All right, I'll dance with you," she said before Yossarian could even speak, "but I won't let you sleep with me." "Who asked you?" Yossarian asked her. "You don't want to sleep with me?" she exclaimed with surprise. "I don't want to dance with you." She seized Yossarian's hand and pulled him out on the dance floor. She was a worse dancer than even he was, but she threw herself about to the synthetic jitterbug music with more uninhibited pleasure than he had ever observed, until he felt his legs falling asleep with boredom, and yanked her off the dance floor toward the table at which the girl he should have been screwing was still sitting tipsily with one hand around Arfi's neck, her orange satin blouse still hanging open slovenly before her full white lacy brassiere, as she made dirty sex talk ostentatiously with Hoople, or Kid Sampson, and Hungry Joe. Just as he reached them, Luciana gave him a forceful, unexpected shove that carried them both well beyond the table, so that they were still alone. She was a tall, earthy, exuberant girl with long hair and a pretty face. A buxom, delightful, flirtatious girl. "All right," she said, "I will let you buy me dinner, but I won't let you sleep with me." "Who asked you?" Yossarian asked with surprise. "You don't want to sleep with me?" "I don't want to buy you dinner." She pulled him out of the nightclub into the street and down a flight of steps into a black market restaurant filled with lively, chirping, attractive girls who all seemed to know each other, and who with the self-conscious military officers from different countries who had come there with them. The food was elegant and expensive, and the aisles were overflowing with great streams of flushed and merry proprietors, all stout and balding. The bustling interior radiated with enormous engulfing waves of fun and warmth. Yossarian got a tremendous kick out of the rude gusto with which Luciana ignored him completely while she shoveled away her whole meal with both hands. She ate like a horse until the last plate was clean, and then she placed her silverware down with an air of conclusion and settled back lazily in her chair with a dreamy and congested look of sated gluttony. She drew a deep, smiling, contented breath and regarded him amorously with a melting gaze. "Okay, Joe," she purred, her glowing dark eyes drowsy and grateful. "Now I will let you sleep with me." "My name is Yossarian." "Okay, Yossarian," she answered with a soft, repentant laugh. "Now I will let you sleep with me." "Who asked you?" said Yossarian. Luciana was stunned. "You don't want to sleep with me?" Yossarian nodded emphatically, laughing, and shot his hand up under her dress. The girl came to life with a horrified start. She jerked her legs away from him instantly, whipping her bottom around. Blushing with alarm and embarrassment, she pushed her skirt back down with a number of prim, sidelong glances about the restaurant. "Now I will let you sleep with me," she explained cautiously in a manner of apprehensive indulgence. "But not now." "I know. When we get back to my room." The girl shook her head, eyeing him mistrustfully and keeping her knees pressed together. "No, now I must go home to my mamma, because my mamma does not like me to dance with soldiers or let them take me to dinner, and she will be very angry with me if I do not come home now. But I will let you write down for me where you live, and tomorrow morning I will come to your room for ficky before I go to my work at the French office. Capiche?" "Bullshit!" Yossarian exclaimed with angry disappointment. "Casa vuol dire bullshit?" Luciana inquired with a blank look. Yossarian broke into loud laughter. He answered her finally in a tone of sympathetic good humor. "It means that I want to escort you now to wherever the hell I have to take you next, so that I can rush back to that nightclub before Arfie leaves with that wonderful tomato he's got, without giving me a chance to ask about an aunt or a friend she must have come with who's just like her. Come?" Subito, he taunted her tenderly. "Mama is waiting, remember?" Si, mama." Yossarian let the girl drag him through the lovely Roman spring night for almost a mile until they reached a chaotic bus depot honking with horns, blazing with red and yellow lights and echoing with the snarling vituperations of unshaven bus drivers pouring loathsome, hair-raising curses out at each other, at their passengers, and at the strolling, unconcerned knots of pedestrians clogging their paths, who ignored them until they were bumped by the buses and began shouting curses back. Luciana vanished aboard one of the diminutive green vehicles, and Yossarian hurried as fast as he could all the way back to the cabaret and the bleary-eyed bleached blonde in the open orange satin blouse. She seemed infatuated with Arfie, but he prayed intensely for her luscious aunt as he ran, or for a luscious girlfriend, sister, cousin, or mother who was just as libidinous and depraved. She would have been perfect for Yossarian, a debauched, coarse, vulgar, amoral, appetizing slattern whom he had longed for and idolized for months. She was a real find. She paid for her own drinks, and she had an automobile, an apartment, and a salmon-colored cameo ring that drove Hungry Joe clean out of his senses with its exquisitely carved figures of a naked boy and girl on a rock. Hungry Joe snorted and pranced and pawed at the floor in salivating lust and groveling need, but the girl would not sell him the ring, even though he offered her all the money in all their pockets and his complicated black camera thrown in. She was not interested in money or cameras. She was interested in fornication. She was gone when Yossarian got there. They were all gone, and he walked right out and moved in wistful dejection through the dark, emptying streets. Yossarian was not often lonely when he was by himself, but he was lonely now in his keen envy of Arfie, who he knew was in bed that very moment with the girl who was just right for Yossarian, and who could also make out any time he wanted to, if he ever wanted to, with either or both of the two slender, stunning, aristocratic women who lived in the apartment upstairs and fructified Yossarian's sex fantasies whenever he had sex fantasies. The beautiful, rich, black-haired countess with the red, wet, nervous lips, and her beautiful, black-haired daughter-in-law. Yossarian was madly in love with all of them as he made his way back to the officer's apartment, in love with Luciana, with the prurient, intoxicated girl in the unbuttoned satin blouse, and with the beautiful rich countess and her beautiful rich daughter-in-law, both of whom would never let him touch them or even flirt with them. They doted kittenishly on Nately and deferred passively to Arfie, but they thought Yossarian was crazy and recoiled from him with distasteful contempt each time he made an indecent proposal or tried to fondle them when they passed on the stairs. They were both superb creatures with pulpy, bright, pointed tongues and mouths like round, warm plums, a little sweet and sticky, a little rotten. They had class. Yossarian was not sure what class was, but he knew that they had it and he did not, and that they knew it too. He could picture, as he walked, the kind of underclothing they wore against their svelte feminine parts, filmy, smooth, clinging garments of deepest black or of opalescent pastel radiance with flowering lace borders, fragrant with the tantalizing fumes of pampered flesh and scented bath salts rising in a germinating cloud from their blue-white breasts. He wished again that he was where Arfie was, making obscene, brutal, cheerful love with a juicy, drunken tart who didn't give a tinker's damn about him and would never think of him again. But Arfie was already back in the apartment when Yossarian arrived, and Yossarian gaped at him with that same sense of persecuted astonishment he had suffered that same morning over Bologna at his malign and cabalistic and irremovable presence in the nose of the plane. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "That's right, ask him!" Hungry Joe exclaimed in a rage. "Make him tell you what he's doing here!" With a long, theatrical moan, Kid Samson made a pistol of his thumb and forefinger and blew his own brains out. Hoople, chewing away on a bulging wad of bubblegum, drank everything in with a callow, vacant expression on his 15-year-old face. Arfie was tapping the bowl of his pipe against his palm leisurely as he paced back and forth in corpulent self-approval, obviously delighted by the stir he was causing. "Didn't you go home with that girl?" Yossarian demanded. "Oh, sure, I went home with her," Arfie replied. "You didn't think I was going to try to let her find her way home alone, did you?" "Wouldn't she let you stay with her?" "Oh, she wanted me to stay with her, all right," Arfie chuckled. "Don't you worry about good old Arfie. But I wasn't going to take advantage of a sweet kid like that just because she'd had a little too much to drink. What kind of a guy do you think I am?" "Who said anything about taking advantage of her?" Yossarian railed at him in amazement. "All she wanted to do was get into bed with someone. That's the only thing she kept talking about all night long." "That's because she's a little mixed up," Arfie explained. "But I gave her a little talking to and really put some sense into her." "You bastard!" Yossarian exclaimed and sank down tiredly on the divan beside Kid Samson. "Why the hell didn't you give her to one of us if you didn't want her?" "You see," Hungry Joe asked, "there's something wrong with him." Yossarian nodded and looked at Arfie curiously. "Arfie, tell me something. Don't you ever screw any of them?" Arfie chuckled again with conceited amusement. "Oh, sure, I prod them. Don't you worry about me. But never any nice girls. I know what kind of girls to prod and what kind of girls are not to prod, and I never prod any nice girls. This one was a sweet kid. You could see her family had money. Why, I even got her to throw that ring of hers away right out the car window." Hungry Joe flew into the air with a screech of intolerable pain. "You did what?" he screamed. "You did what?" He began wailing away at Arfie's shoulders and arms with both fists, almost in tears. "I ought to kill you for what you did, you lousy bastard! He's sinful, that's what he is. He's got a dirty mind, ain't he? Ain't he got a dirty mind?" "The dirtiest," Yossarian agreed. "What are you fellas talking about?" Arfie asked with genuine puzzlement, tucking his face away protectively inside the cushioning insulation of his oval shoulders. "Aw, come on, Joe," he pleaded with a smile of mild discomfort. "Quit punching me, will you?" But Hungry Joe would not quit punching until Yossarian picked him up and pushed him away toward his bedroom. Yossarian moved listlessly into his own room, undressed, and went to sleep. A second later, it was morning, and someone was shaking him. "What are you waking me up for?" he whimpered. It was Michaela, the skinny maid with a merry disposition and homely sallow face, and she was waking him up because he had a visitor waiting just outside the door. Luciana! He could hardly believe it. and she was alone in the room with him after Michaela had departed, lovely, hale, and statuesque, steaming and rippling with an irrepressible affectionate vitality, even as she remained in one place and frowned at him irately. She stood like a youthful female colossus with her magnificent columnar legs apart on high white shoes and wedged heels, wearing a pretty green dress and swinging a large, flat white leather pocketbook, with which she cracked him hard across the face when he leaped out of bed to grab her. Yossarian staggered backward out of range in a daze, clutching his stinging cheek with bewilderment. Pig! She spat out at him viciously, her nostrils flaring in a look of savage disdain. Vive comme un animal! With a fierce, guttural, scornful, disgusted oath, she strode across the room and threw open the 3 tall casement windows, letting inside an effulgent flood of sunlight and crisp fresh air that washed through the stuffy room like an invigorating tonic. She placed her pocketbook on a chair and began tidying the room, picking his things up from the floor and off the tops of the furniture, throwing his socks, handkerchief, and underwear into an empty drawer of the dresser, and hanging his shirt and trousers up in the closet. Yossarian ran out of the bedroom and into the bathroom and brushed his teeth. He washed his hands and face and combed his hair. When he ran back, the room was in order and Luciana was almost undressed. Her expression was relaxed. She left her earrings on the dresser and padded barefoot to the bed, wearing just a pink rayon chemise that came down to her hips. She glanced about the room prudently to make certain there was nothing she had overlooked in the way of neatness, and then drew back the coverlet and stretched herself out luxuriously with an expression of feline expectation. She beckoned to him longingly with a husky laugh. Now, she announced in a whisper, holding both arms out to him eagerly, now I will let you sleep with me. She told him some lies about a single weekend in bed with a slaughtered fiancé in the Italian army, and they all turned out to be true, for she cried, "Finito!" almost as soon as he had started, and wondered why he didn't stop, until he had finitoed too and explained to her. He lit cigarettes for both of them. She was enchanted by the deep suntan covering his whole body. He wondered about the pink chemise that she would not remove. It was cut like a man's undershirt, with narrow shoulder straps, and concealed the invisible scar on her back that she refused to let him see after he had made her tell him it was there. She grew tense as fine steel when he traced the mutilated contours with his fingertip, from a pit in her shoulder blade almost to the base of her spine. He winced at the many tortured nights she had spent in the hospital, drugged or in pain, with the ubiquitous, ineradicable odors of ether, fecal matter, and disinfectant, of human flesh mortified and decaying amid the white uniforms, the rubber-soled shoes, and the eerie night lights glowing dimly in the dawn corridors. She had been wounded in an air raid. Dove? He asked, and he held his breath in suspense. Napoli. Germans? Americani. His heart cracked, and he fell in love. He wondered if she would marry him. Tu sei pazzo, she told him with a pleasant laugh. Why am I crazy? He asked. Perché non posso sposare? Why can't you get married? Because I am not a virgin, she answered. What has that got to do with it? Who will marry me? No one wants a girl who is not a virgin. I will marry you. Ma non posso sposarti. Why can't you marry me? Perché sei pazzo? Why am I crazy? Perché vuoi sposarmi? Yossarian wrinkled his forehead with quizzical amusement. You won't marry me because I'm crazy, and you say I'm crazy because I want to marry you. Is that right? Si. Tu sais pas, he told her loudly. Perché? She shouted back at him indignantly, her unavoidable round breast rising and falling in a saucy huff beneath the pink chemise as she sat up in bed indignantly. Why am I crazy? Because you won't marry me. Stupido! She shouted back at him, and smacked him loudly and flamboyantly on the chest with the back of her hand. Non posso sposarti. Non capisci? No, non posso sposarti. Oh, sure, I understand. And why can't you marry me? Perché sei pazzo? And why am I crazy? Perché vuoi sposarmi? Because I want to marry you. Carina ti amo, he explained, and he drew her gently back down to the pillow. Ti amo molto. Tu sei pazzo, she murmured in reply, flattered. Perché? Because you say you love me. How can you love a girl who is not a virgin? Because I can't marry you. She bolted right up again in a threatening rage. Why can't you marry me? She demanded, ready to clout him again if he gave an uncomplimentary reply. Just because I am not a virgin? No, darling. Because you're crazy. She stared at him in blank resentment for a moment, and then tossed her head back and roared appreciatively with hearty laughter. She gazed at him now with new approval when she stopped, the lush, responsive tissues of her dark face turning darker still and blooming somnolently with a swelling and beautifying infusion of blood. Her eyes grew dim. He crushed out both their cigarettes, and they turned into each other wordlessly in an engrossing kiss, just as Hungry Joe came meandering into the room without knocking to ask if Yossarian wanted to go out with him to look for girls. Hungry Joe stopped on a dime when he saw them and shot out of the room. Yossarian shot out of bed even faster and began shouting at Luciana to get dressed. The girl was dumbfounded. He pulled her roughly out of bed by her arm and flung her away toward her clothing, then raced for the door in time to slam it shut as Hungry Joe was running back in with his camera. Hungry Joe had his leg wedged in the door and would not pull it out. Let me in, he begged urgently, wriggling and squirming maniacally. Let me in! He stopped struggling for a moment to gaze up into Yossarian's face through the crack in the door, with which he must have supposed he was a beguiling smile. Me no Hungry Joe, he explained earnestly. Me heap big photographer from Life magazine. Heap big picture on heap big cover. I make you big Hollywood star, Yossarian. Multi-dinero, multi-divorces, multi-ficky-ficky all day long. See. Yossarian slammed the door shut when Hungry Joe stepped back a bit to try to shoot a picture of Luciana dressing. Hungry Joe attacked the stout Woodenberry fanatically, fell back to reorganize his energies, and hurled himself forward fanatically again. Yossarian slithered into his own clothes between assaults. Luciana had her green and white summer dress on and was holding the skirt bunched up above her waist. A wave of misery broke over him as he saw her about to vanish inside her panties forever. He reached out to grasp her and drew her to him by the raised calf of her leg. She hopped forward and molded herself against him. Yossarian kissed her ears and her closed eyes romantically and rubbed the backs of her thighs. She began to hum sensually a moment before Hungry Joe hurled his frail body against the door in still one more desperate attack and almost knocked them both down. Yossarian pushed her away. Vite, he scolded her. Get your things on. What the hell are you talking about? She wanted to know. Fast! Can't you understand English? Get your clothes on, fast! Stupido, she snarled back at him. Vite is French, not Italian. Subito, that's what you mean, subito. Si, that's what I mean, subito. Si, she responded cooperatively and ran for her shoes and earrings. Hungry Joe had paused in his attack to shoot pictures through the closed door. Yossarian could hear the camera shutter clicking. When both he and Luciana were ready, Yossarian waited for Hungry Joe's next charge and yanked the door open on him unexpectedly. Hungry Joe spilled forward into the room like a floundering frog. Yossarian skipped nimbly around him, guiding Luciana along behind him through the apartment and out into the hallway. They bounced down the stairs with a great roistering clatter, laughing out loud breathlessly and knocking their hilarious heads together each time they paused to rest. Near the bottom, they met Nately coming up and stopped laughing. Nately was drawn, dirty, and unhappy. His tie was twisted and his shirt was rumpled, and he walked with his hands in his pockets. He wore a hangdog, hopeless look. What's the matter, kid? Yossarian inquired compassionately. I'm flat broke again, Nately replied with a lame and distracted smile. What am I going to do? Yossarian didn't know. Nately had spent the last 32 hours at $20 an hour with the apathetic whore he adored, and had nothing left of his pay or of the lucrative allowance he received every month from his wealthy and generous father. That meant he could not spend any more time with her. She would not allow him to walk beside her as she strolled the pavements, soliciting other servicemen, and she was infuriated when she spied him trailing her from a distance. He was free to hang around her apartment if he cared to, but there was no certainty that she would be there. And she would give him nothing unless he could pay. She found sex uninteresting. Nately wanted the assurance that she was not going to bed with anyone unsavory or with someone he knew. Captain Black always made it a point to buy her each time he came to Rome, just so he could torment Nately with the news that he had thrown his sweetheart around another hump and watch Nately eat his liver as he related the atrocious indignities to which he had forced her to submit. Luciana was touched by Nately's forlorn air, but broke loudly into robust laughter again the moment she stepped outside into the sunny street with Yossarian, and heard Hungry Joe beseeching them from the window to come back and take their clothes off, because he really was a photographer from Life magazine. Luciana fled mirthfully along the sidewalk in her high white wedgies, pulling Yossarian along in tow with the same lusty and ingenuous zeal she had displayed in the dance hall the night before and at every moment since. Yossarian caught up and walked with his arm around her waist until they came to the corner and she stepped away from him. She straightened her hair in a mirror from her pocketbook and put lipstick on. "Why don't you ask me to let you write my name and address on a piece of paper so that you will be able to find me again when you come to Rome?" she suggested. "Why don't you let me write your name and address down on a piece of paper?" he agreed. "Why?" she demanded belligerently, her mouth curling suddenly into a vehement sneer and her eyes flashing with anger. "So you can tear it up into little pieces as soon as I leave?" "Who's going to tear it up?" Yossarian protested in confusion. "What the hell are you talking about?" "You will," she insisted. "You'll tear it up into little pieces the minute I'm gone, and go walking away like a big shot because a tall, young, beautiful girl like me, Luciana, let you sleep with her and did not ask you for money." "How much money are you asking me for?" he asked her. "Stupido!" she shouted with emotion. "I am not asking you for any money." She stamped her foot and raised her arm in a turbulent gesture that made Yossarian fear she was going to crack him in the face again with her great pocketbook. Instead, she scribbled her name and address on a slip of paper and thrust it at him. "Here!" she taunted him sardonically, biting on her lip to still a delicate tremor. Don't forget to tear it into tiny pieces as soon as I am gone." Then she smiled at him serenely, squeezed his hand, and, with a whispered regretful adieu, pressed herself against him for a moment and then straightened and walked away with unconscious dignity and grace. The minute she was gone, Yossarian tore the slip of paper up and walked away in the other direction, feeling very much like a big shot because a beautiful young girl like Luciana had slept with him and did not ask for money. He was pretty pleased with himself until he looked up in the dining room of the Red Cross building and found himself eating breakfast with dozens and dozens of other servicemen in all kinds of fantastic uniforms. And then all at once he was surrounded by images of Luciana getting out of her clothes and into her clothes and caressing and haranguing him tempestuously in the pink rayon chemise she wore to bed with him and would not take off. Yossarian choked on his toast and eggs at the enormity of his error in tearing her long, lithe, nude, young, vibrant limbs into tiny pieces of paper so impudently, and dumping her down so smugly into the gutter from the curb. He missed her terribly already. There were so many strident faceless people in uniform in the dining room with him. He felt an urgent desire to be alone with her again soon, and sprang up impetuously from his table and went running outside and back down the street toward the apartment in search of the tiny bits of paper in the gutter. But they had all been flushed away by the street cleaner's hose. He couldn't find her again in the Allied officers' nightclub that evening, or in the sweltering, burnished, hedonistic bedlam of the Black Market restaurant with its vast, bobbing wooden trays of elegant food and its chirping flock of bright and lovely girls. He couldn't even find the restaurant. When he went to bed alone, he dodged Flack over Bologna again in a dream, with Arfie hanging over his shoulder abominably in the plain with a bloated, sordid leer. In the morning he ran looking for Luciana in all the French offices he could find, but nobody knew what he was talking about. And then he ran in terror, so jumpy, distraught, and disorganized that he just had to keep running in terror somewhere to the enlisted men's apartments for the squat maid in the lime-colored panties, whom he found dusting in Snowden's room on the 5th floor in her drab brown sweater and heavy dark skirt. Snowden was still alive then, and Yossarian could tell it was Snowdon's room from the name stenciled in white on the blue duffel bag he tripped over as he plunged through the doorway at her in a frenzy of creative desperation. The woman caught him by the wrist before he could fall as he came stumbling toward her in need, and pulled him along down on top of her as she flopped over backward onto the bed and enveloped him hospitably in her flaccid and consoling embrace, her dust mop aloft in her hand like a banner as her broad, brutish, congenial face gazed up at him fondly with a smile of unperjured friendship. There was a sharp elastic snap as she rolled the lime-colored pennies off beneath them both without disturbing him. He stuffed money into her hand when they were finished. She hugged him in gratitude. He hugged her. She hugged him back and then pulled him down on top of her on the bed again. He stuffed more money into her hand when they were finished this time and ran out of the room before she could begin hugging him in gratitude again. Back at his own apartment, he threw his things together as fast as he could, left for Nately what money he had, and ran back to Pianosa on a supply plane to apologize to Hungry Joe for shutting him out of the bedroom. The apology was unnecessary, for Hungry Joe was in high spirits when Yossarian found him. Hungry Joe was grinning from ear to ear, and Yossarian turned sick at the sight of him, for he understood instantly what the high spirits meant. 40 missions, Hungry Joe announced readily in a voice lyrical with relief and elation. The Colonel raised them again! Yossarian was stunned. But I've got 32, goddammit! 3 more and I would have been through! Hungry Joe shrugged indifferently. The Colonel wants 40 missions, he repeated. Yossarian shoved him out of the way and ran right into the hospital.